Long time no talk, yeah. So future's loading, and I bet, when we first built this presentation, we did not figure we'd be ever in this state at this point in time. So certainly, digital accessibility, the internet, e-commerce, everything has sort of really changed. And of course, I can't say it more, but day over day, accessibility just seems to be a going concern right now. And everything that we do in our business, or even within what's happening in the world, it's changed quite dramatically. So I think for those that have been on, we've talked about this slide. We're focused on being in compliance. We want to be sure that we meet the needs and requests of a large and growing population. And we know that common things like macular degeneration, diabetes, just common ailments are certainly causing more and more vision loss, or low vision, blindness, and so on. But again, we talk about it being the right thing to do. So as Likia said this morning, vision problems are pervasive and so on. There's about 1.3 billion worldwide that are visually impaired, and that's a significant market, obviously. And within that, in the US, there's at least 30 million alone, and more so now in the event that we're currently in today, where organizations want to still deliver, product, goods, services, and so on. This is not something that's going to stop, and certainly we have a laser focus on this right now with COVID happening. So as we talk about this a little bit further, here's what's really happening. I mean, certainly there's been a paradigm shift, and I said that this was a paradigm shift, a few months ago. We just see so much demand in this space more than anything else, and there's been such a shift for documents and whatever is on the web. But as Matt and everybody has sort of echoed, it can't be ignored right now. This event that's happening at this time has certainly put a magnifying glass on the ability to have more digital documents going online, and how to keep those clients, and for that matter, how to keep your business going. So let me throw it over to Scott, and he can talk about the whys of this whole thing.
Thanks, Dennis. First off, as we found from Lenny's presentation and some of the other presentations we've heard already today, ultimately accessibility is a civil right under the Americans with Disabilities Act, certainly in the United States, and other pieces of legislation around the world and in Canada. You have to be cognizant of meeting the needs of people that need accessible formats. There's a large population of users. Greg pointed that out in the last presentation. Certainly Dennis's earlier slide is there. And since everything revolves around the user experience, customer experience, digital customer experience, whatever you want to call it, accessibility is incredibly important, because this has largely been an underserved population that clearly has significant buying power, and certainly deserves access to the information that people in the sighted world are used to having, just as a matter of course. Next slide, Dennis. So interestingly enough, when you're talking about future-proofing your program, when you examine what's in scope, there are a lot of things that are in scope in terms of making documents and information accessible to people who need the accessible formats, either electronic or accommodation formats. Archival documents. So if you've got records stored that might be retrieved by somebody who is blind or partially sighted, that is part in scope. All the documents that you create in business, PowerPoint presentations, Word documents, correspondence, employment records, policies, all those things are in scope. If you have documents that can be accessed via your website, or via some sort of secure member portal in the case of a health insurance company or something like that, those documents are in the scope for remediation. And finally, all the bills and statements and policies and premium notices and things like that that you get from various and sundry vendors who you do business with. Your utility bill, for example. All those transaction style documents are in scope. Next slide, please. So, what do you need to plan for? You know, what if we're going to future-proof? What do you have to do? Well, first things first, you need to have an accessibility policy that tells the world, you know, what you're going to do to make sure that the information that you provide is going to be in accessible format. We've heard from Berkir at Truist and Kathy Level from Regions Bank today about some of the challenges and their journeys towards creating a culture of inclusion. Greg very eloquently at the end of his presentation was describing the need really to, if you're truly customer centric, to provide for those who have disabilities, and then at least uh, make sure that they have an equal opportunity to interact with your organization. Something else that is part of every plan, or should be part of every plan, is a training plan, so people who are creating documents, who are interacting with customers, understand what's required for accessibility and what your organization can offer, and how to go about providing or creating documents in accessible format, or a format that can be made easily accessible. And something that a lot of people don't consider in terms of their plans is to make sure that their vendors, the people they do business with, are also providing what they provide in an accessible format. Um, One of the obligations as a software developer, and we know this very, very well, is that as you build user interfaces, if you're doing business with the government, or if it's the right thing to do, which it is, you should do the best you can to make your user interface as accessible as possible. So as somebody who's doing business with vendors, it's really, really important to make sure that your purchasing department understands that you really want to do business with vendors who provide documents and services in accessible formats. So what does that mean? If you're buying new software, ask your vendor for a software VPAT, which will detail how well they comply with the WCAG at least 2.0 level AA standards. And you state upfront to them in your RFPs and RFIs that your organization is inclusive, and you're only going to acquire hardware and software and other products if they support accessible formats. Next slide, Dennis. Something else that we're all aware of, we've seen plenty in the press about it, and certainly a lot of large settlements have been reached with organizations that have run afoul of the laws, but all websites have to be accessible. And that also now includes most of the documents that can be accessed through a website. Those need to be made accessible. We mentioned archival documents earlier. Point of sale information needs to be made accessible. You have to plan on being able to provide physical accessible formats to those that request them. So that means Braille, large print, things like that. And lastly, a very, very important part of the equation for making your organization future-proof is to train your customer service representatives regarding what your policies are relative to accessibility. They have to understand if somebody calls up and says, I need to have a document in a large print format because I'm sight challenged. They have to know who to escalate to or what to say regarding what your organization's policy is towards providing that service. I believe I'm back over to you now, Dennis.
Yeah, and certainly, when we talk about the front line and CSRs, that's one of the hot spots. I mean, working with folks in this industry, the number one things that they do would be call into a customer service line and And one of our employees actually did that, full knowing well that we produce all those documents in our facilities and so on in Braille. She had just switched over when she joined our organization, and they said, no, we don't offer Braille. So, I mean, there's nothing more annoying than stirring the pot at that point when you knew that we were actually doing that business and so on. So that brings into play, a lot of things like policies and practices, especially in the world of training as well. A lot of organizations outsource things like payroll, for example. And I'm going to use the same employee where, she joined and quickly contacted the payroll organization to register to get her pay stub. And of course, it wasn't accessible. The website wasn't accessible. So, I mean, these are problematic things. And this is just, these are all by experience. Thank goodness it was years ago, and they were able to fix everything up. But when we talk about workplace accommodation, that's not just physical access like ramps and automatic opening doors, but also your physical workspaces as well, your equipment that you're using, providing things like accessible braille displays or software like NVDA or JAWS and so on must be considered. So you want to be sure you have policies around that area, not just at the corporate level, but also at your HR level as well. Look at your documents at that point and how you interact with those documents. I mean, even tools like we're on today, like Zoom, for example, those can be problematic, but thank goodness Zoom is an accessible conferencing system. Captioning for video for those that are deaf becomes very, very important. And, I mean, as we look at various laws that are coming into place, I mean, a lot of these laws are focused on the fact that we had low employment rates years ago, that we have willing and able bodies that are able to work. So being able to be gainfully employed is critical. And so once you set up those policies, ensure that you have an ongoing audit that is done. Make sure you review all aspects of how an organization is working with an individual that is gainfully employed and perhaps has a disability or is a disabled person, depending on how they want to state it. Once again, I can't stress more than anything else. QA and testing. I mean, we talk about usability and we talk about accessibility. I would argue, Scott, that usability is just as, if not more important than actual accessibility. You can comply to accessibility, but certainly if the documents or your information that you're trying to offer is not usable and it just makes life a pain in the neck, you can be compliant all day long, but if it's not going to be easily consumed, then you want to be sure that you have a methodology to outsource for consultants out there, or you get that training done internally. Very important stuff ultimately. So as we move forward, I mean, we talked about all these regulations, and you want to really, as part of future proofing, dive into this. Each of the sectors that you work in will have a certain piece of legislation, all percolating up to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And certainly when we talk about Section 508, which went through an ICT refresh in 2018, this, if you are supplying the US government or any government for that matter, Canadian government, the UK government, and so on, they're going to have strict policies on how they want to do business and the ways of doing business with you as far as accessibility is concerned. And if you are in a specific vertical like healthcare, or in this case here, the Food and Drug Safety Innovation Act, which is for pharmacy and prescriptions, again, Lainey talked about the fact that labels are just blank if you don't have it made accessible. And certainly every single organization has a specific regulation. So I would urge you very much to have your compliance folks or yourselves bone up and make sure you understand exactly what those laws and regulations ultimately mean. And finally, compliance, essentially, once you have that done, you want to be sure that you have that accommodation done. As we spoke in our session before Greg's, things like offer Braille, things like offer that one-off accommodation, because those are the things that can easily get you into trouble as far as future proofing is concerned. Implement that as a one-off request or implement it as a program. It's critically important at this point. So I'll leave that and I'll send it back over to Scott.
Thanks, Dennis. One of the things that we discovered in working with a number of different clients is that based on the types of documents that they need to make into accessible formats, there are different strategies and tools that you can use to bring automation to the table, to make the time to turn those documents into accessible documents significantly shorter, and to reduce some of the costs that are tied together with the labor required to do manual remediation. At one time, manual remediation was the only choice that you had, which basically meant that somebody was manually transcribing things into Braille. It meant that people were manually inserting tags into to PDF documents and things like that to make sure that they were usable with assistive technologies. With some of the software that's available today, particularly software that's designed to be purpose-built to accomplish the task, you have the opportunity to really leverage automation in a meaningful sort of way. At Crawford Technologies, we built a platform to do that called Accessibility Now, that provides a series of tools that can be combined to help you reach what those goals are, but understanding what types of documents you're dealing with, what the applications are, and what the requirements are going to be, will lead you to the right set of tools to enable you to build a program that's repeatable and sustainable. Next slide, please, Dennis. All right, so as we walk through the Accessibility Now platform as an example, part of the solution is based on software. All right, the software is designed to use AI techniques and automation to convert source files into PDF UA, WCAG PDF, HTML5, and also all of the accommodation formats. The idea is that you start with whatever drives your print initially. You apply templates and automation, as the case may be, and you certainly have the ability at scale and at speed to create accessible documents. There still is a lot of demand for manual remediation services, and certainly we provide those services, as well as consulting and training and assessments and validation, as well as the creation of the physical accommodation formats. Next slide, Dennis. Okay. The challenge is, as a person who requires accessible formats, I need to have access to information. There are a couple of basic classes of documents that we describe. Dennis, if you'll hit the next key, please. Yeah. There are transactional documents. Everyone receives them. Utility bills, bank statements, credit card bills, premium notices, insurance policies, and the like. Pretty much everything else we describe as static. The difference between transactional and static is pretty straightforward. Transactional documents have lots of variable data, but the formats remain pretty much the same. In static documents, there's less similarity in formats. You may version the content, but it could be correspondence, or it could be marketing brochures or white papers. It could be newsletters, for that matter. Stuff that is generally published. The challenge, of course, is to be able to, at scale, turn those into accessible formats. And we built the Accessibility Now platform, if you'll hit the button again, Dennis, to be a series of tools that can be combined to enable you to reach your accessibility goals. And by building a platform, you have the ability to create a scenario where, as new documents need to be created as accessible in accessible formats, that you can do it easily and at scale. We have tools that are specific to dealing with the static document side of the house. We have tools that are designed like Accessibility Now Transactional and Designer, and Gateway, that are designed to work with the high volume transactional output type of documents. There are services involved as well. One of which is our site scan service, which is a free service that we provide to people who want to scan their websites to identify documents that need to be remediated. We also have software that works hand in glove with SiteScan that validates, whether a document is accessible or not. And clearly, we bring to the table a lot of professional services to help people build their programs. Ultimately, what we want to do is help people achieve their accessibility goals. Here's the list of all the components of the Accessibility Now platform. I'm not going to bother to go through them. You'll get a copy of these slides afterwards. But clearly, the intent is to enable organizations to intelligently take a look at what their document challenges are in terms of accessibility and build a solution that allows them to leverage automation to achieve those goals. Next slide, Dennis, and I think it's back to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Scott. I guess as we talk about the document accessibility solutions, we want to go and cover, one of those documents that we just momentarily talked about. We have both static documents and we have transactional documents. I'm sorry, this is just running in a little bit off here. Transactional documents, obviously, we can build, because they're systematically output, they're highly predictable in nature and so on. We've been talking over the past couple sessions about the fact that you can create documents in batch, and you can certainly create them dynamically on the fly. And Bakir talked about this as being one of the critical strategies out there as far as being able to retrieve a document on the fly and present it in real time with it fully tagged. And certainly those tools using our transactional, Accessibility Now transactional software allows us to take common documents like you see on the screen here and make them fully accessible virtually in milliseconds from glass to glass for presentation purposes. A lot of our customers, however, they may start off with their accessibility needs as being relatively small, but they actually see it grow quite rapidly. But as a result, they can actually use our accessibility services service bureau scenario, whereby they can outsource it to us, where we do all the building, and we have our expertise of individuals that are able to create these documents and also create and mail these documents on behalf of those clients out there. So, this can include things like testing and training and audit and QA and QC, which, a traditional organization that's just stepping into the world of accessibility may not have that acumen. And we can certainly give that to them in terms of being able to get them off the ground. And as I say, future-proof them from any potential litigation in this scenario, or for that matter, help them build that business so that they can be future-proof for the future at this point. So we talk about the transactional solution as being a template-based, rules-based, or business rules-based solution, where we set up trigger points inside a GUI and we apply it to the print-ready files that are going through. And as we know, when we talk about document management, document production, and so on, traditionally we think of physical paper production. This holds very much true as far as the digital production is concerned, being able to take in and ingest those various print type files and be able to put them either back onto a e-presentment site or back onto an archive somewhere along the way. And certainly that takes care at scale, at speed, the ability for us to help organizations ensure that personal or highly variable type document is made accessible. Now, on the other side of things, as we talked about earlier, static documents, we can talk about things like courseware, educational products, brochures, those types of things can all be done through various software tools. We are unique from a perspective that we can do this at speed with automation type solutions, and a number of pieces within the platform that you can engage with us at any point in time, rather than just saying, I need to buy the whole thing. You may be in different parts of your journey through the accessibility side of things. So it allows you to pick and choose what you need. And certainly one of the key tools that we have is an auto tagging tool called Accessibility Now Publisher, which allows us to essentially grab documents in through things like a Dropbox or watch folders and so on. And it basically allows us to push through automated tagging from a PDF to accessible PDF or even HTML5. What it does is it reduces that slow, manual tagging that we traditionally see out there, which is really what the industry has been all about, but it automates that process to ensure that we can do this in minutes and seconds rather than days now. And as we began to monetize that, we also put that onto an online site, such as this that you see here, allowing organizations that need perhaps just a single document, like the most recent city budget report done. They could be uploaded and made accessible so that they meet their compliance or some of their settlement requirements out there, like I had earlier discussed within the state of Florida. And finally, as we've said over and over again, don't forget about the folks that need things like Braille or large print, e-text or audio, because those are physical formats that will remain relevant and present. And certainly those are the accommodation formats that the ADA talks about, that you should provide reasonable accommodation. And these solutions are definitely within what we provide. So ultimately, when you kind of bundle it together as far as future proofing is concerned, you need to consider all aspects of your documents, all aspects of the website, because if you can't get to the website being accessible, the documents are not useful anyway. So make sure that you have a plan in place. We talked about that policy out there, accessibility policy, and really create that culture of inclusion. So with that, I think that's everything that we wanted to discuss, Scott, unless you have anything else.
No, I think, Dennis, we've accomplished our task. The bottom line is um, you need to make a plan if you want to make sure that you can sustain and extend your accessibility program. And hopefully we've been able to provide a little bit of insight as to what that plan should include.
I think we have an extra 10 minutes right now before, so we can open up for some questions, and I'll throw it back to Likia out there.
I have a couple of questions for you, and while you're answering those, maybe some more will come in. The first one is, can you explain mobile accessibility and what we should do, what we should consider in the future?
Well, that's the big thing that's on the horizon right now. Obviously, we all carry around smartphones, and that goes equally the same for those that are blind, partially sighted, or have a cognitive disability. And I don't think that will change. As far as we go into the future, smartphones or some sort of central device that we depend on is going to be critical. So going mobile, and I know, Scott, you did a whole session just on going mobile on the other side of the tracks. But this is the same thing that's happening within the accessibility space. Going to accessible HTML5, where you have responsive content, you can digest it on a phone anywhere, anytime, is going to be critical. So organizations also need to consider, as we future-proof, what is their strategy for their mobile strategy, and how are they going to attack the accessibility side of things? Certainly, when you go mobile, it can also include things like Braille that's mobile, large print that's mobile. Certainly, audio is easily mobile with assistive devices, or even talkback type requirements as well. But Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've read some research, Dennis, that estimates that approximately 80% of the people who are blind or partially sighted or cognitively disabled are using mobile devices to interact with content and with programs. Clearly, you've got voiceover and some of the other text to speech to text or uh, file to speech translation software that are built in, that's pretty good. So as long as you can provide an accessible web experience and accessible documents that can be consumed using those devices or those programs, you're in great shape. So part of our strategy, in terms of going mobile, is to ensure that we can create easily documents in an accessible HTML5 format. I hear from the PDF Association that they're trying to build responsive PDF as well. So we'll see what that entails. But certainly, in terms of screen readers, uh, the metadata that's contained in a PDF would allow it to be consumed, on a mobile device as well, as long as that functionality is enabled.
Oh, and also don't forget about EPUB 3 accessible and its
Oh yeah,
future iterations as well. I mean, that's certainly a part of the mobile strategy as well for the education space.
yeah, and if you look beyond North America, there's a lot of activity around EPUB and a lot of activity around HTML5 in particular, for instance, in Europe. I did a session with Jen Goulden, who runs our QA for our accessibility business. Jen is blind, and it was dispelling the myths between HTML5 and accessible PDF, and everyone started out saying, well, they hated PDF. They really, really liked HTML5. So in terms of mobile, that may be our future.
Yep. A lot of legacy issues with PDF, but
Oh, yeah.
certainly as we've gone forward with the new format PDFs, Unicode fonts, and so on, they're just as accessible.
All right, thanks, guys. There's another question. You talked about VPATs. Is there a form we will need to follow?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest answer for that is there are various iterations of VPATs and examples that are out there that are available on the web, and certainly for the U.S. government, it has a specific format. There are various variations of that have been updated most recently. I know, Scott, you and I have had a chance to take a look at that as well.
Absolutely, we have, Dennis, and it amazes me how many different variations there are. I've seen a couple of VPAT requests come through with requests for proposals from some of our prospects and customers, and only to have what they sent us be supplanted by the latest revision that includes WCAG 2.1 recommendations as well.
Yes.
They all work the same way, though. There's a specific set of functionality that you have to achieve to be level A or level AA or level AAA or version 2 or 2.1, and basically there's the functionality, and as a vendor of software, you have to say whether you comply or whether you don't comply. Or if you partially comply, and then there's a place for putting in notes. So the idea of the VPAT is it gives people a repeatable format that they can utilize to describe how accessible their software product is.
Okay, we don't have any more questions. So thank you so much for a great presentation. Hold on, I think there might be one question. Okay, here's a question. From what we understand, accessibility now supports print files. Say we have AFP, non-accessible PDF file. Could you explain how your setup with archival systems like CMOD FileNet works? How you would build a tag remediation rule that works for all PDFs of that type? What is the average time and, if possible, cost to get them accessible, like simple, medium, complex, if that figure is available for many past use cases?
Well, for starters, I'd recommend that we take this extended conversation offline because you've asked a lot of things that'll take longer than 5 minutes to answer. But the short answer is this: you have to have a strategy relative to how you're going to deal with your archive. You have a choice. You can convert your entire archive into documents and store them in an accessible format. That's one strategy. It's not a great strategy because it will require lots and lots of storage and lots of time to probably convert all those documents. Another strategy is actually to create templates that are pre-built with the rules, if you will, the configuration to take your source AFP and turn it into an accessible format on the fly. We do this for a number of very, very large banks and insurance companies. And the process happens like this. Someone requests a document for viewing. Let's say it's an old bank statement that they need for some reason. Maybe they're doing expense reports because they haven't done it for a while. And they needed it in an accessible format. So the request is made through however they log on to the system. It could be through a web app, or it could be through a secure portal. The request is actually handled and goes via web services. The retrieval is made from the archive. And we have software that basically is a REST API. integration that intercepts that document, evaluates it very, very quickly, applies a template that is used to create the tagging, and can return it as either an accessible PDF or as accessible HTML5. That happens on the fly. It takes maybe 100 milliseconds or so for the request to be submitted to the archive and the response to be returned to the requester. In terms of how long it takes to actually integrate, Sunrise and Designer and our transforms together, accessibility now transactional with your archive, depends somewhat on the environment that you're in. But certainly we've got a lot of experience doing that. Give you some advice and some harder numbers when we talk offline about what you're trying to accomplish.
Thanks so much, Scott. And that person will be in touch with you. He got your email address, so he will be contacting you for further details.
Cool.
So with that, we end our accessibility session. Everyone, thank you so much for being a part of our first summit. We enjoyed presenting to you. We apologize for the little technical glitches we had, but I think overall it was very useful information that was shared here with everybody. And we hope to do it again at some point. What's going to happen now is you're just going to be moved into the main session for a quick closing remark. Quick closing remarks from Ernie. And this time it'll be much easier than when we did this morning because everybody's just being moved back in. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
The Queen's Wave.